The colony world of New Carthage had already fallen before Daniel's boots touched its soil. Once a thriving human settlement, its shining towers and sprawling gardens now lay in ruin, cracked open under orbital fire. The Zerkai had descended like locusts, burning everything they couldn't enslave, painting the horizon with fire and smoke. Corporal Daniel Rourke was one of the few survivors of the 22nd Infantry, scrambling through the broken skeleton of the city with his pulse rifle overheating against his shoulder. His helmet sensors screamed warnings of enemy movement at every turn. The air itself stank of blood, ozone, and poison. The Zerkai weren't mindless beasts, they were hunters. Cold reptilian eyes, plated hides harder than steel, and a culture built on slaughter. Their poisoned weapons weren't just designed to kill. They were meant to spread terror. A single scratch could end a soldier in minutes, and Daniel had seen it happen too many times today. The city was a labyrinth of collapsed highways, burning transports, and shattered glass. Daniel ducked behind a crumbled wall, firing short bursts at a squad of Zerkai advancing in a wedge formation. His shots tore through one, maybe two, but the rest barely slowed. The pulse rifle's battery whined low. He gritted his teeth, swapping cells, his hands slick with sweat. He was running out of everything: ammo, medkits, strength. But he didn't stop. That was the first rule of being human in this war. You keep moving. Then came the scream, high-pitched, desperate, cutting through the thunder of collapsing buildings and the growl of alien war machines. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. Across a broken plaza, he spotted her. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, her pale hair matted with dust, clothes torn from running. She wasn't armed, not a soldier. Just another survivor, and she wasn't alone. A hunting pack of 5 Zerkai circled her. Their warlord, taller, broader, his armor carved with trophies of bone, stepped forward. He raised his weapon, a spear tipped with a shard of obsidian crystal, slick with venom that shimmered green even in the smoke-filled air. Daniel didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds. He didn't ask himself whether she mattered more than his mission, or if she was just one more civilian who'd die before the day was done. He just moved, breaking from cover. Daniel sprinted across the plaza, boots slamming against stone. The Zerkai turned at the sound of his charge, but too late. Their warlord thrust the poisoned spear down toward the girl's chest. Daniel threw himself forward, slamming into her. Shoving her out of the strike's path, the spear drove straight into his back. The venom was molten fire in his veins. His lungs seized. His body screamed with agony, as if his blood itself wanted to crawl out of him. But Daniel didn't fall. He grabbed the spear shaft with both hands and snapped it in two, sheer adrenaline ripping through his pain. With his other hand, he brought up the rifle and emptied it point blank, blasting 2 of the Zerkai hunters into smoking heaps. The warlord hissed, dragging the broken haft from Daniel's back as the others lunged. Daniel spun, firing wildly, stumbling to one knee. The poison was eating him alive already. His vision swam, the world shuddering at the edges. The girl he had shielded scrambled toward him. She pressed her hands against his wound, her face filled with horror. Her touch was warm, almost glowing. "You fool!" she whispered, voice trembling yet furious. "You don't even know who I am." Daniel coughed blood, forcing a crooked grin through the pain. "Doesn't matter. No one deserves that kind of end." Before he could say more, the ground shook violently. Dropships screamed overhead, engines roaring as reinforcements descended. The battle around them exploded into chaos. Human squads charging in from the west, more Zerkai landing from the east. Plasma bolts streaked the air, and then came the words that made Daniel blink through the haze. The girl's bodyguards arrived, clad in ornate armor, their voices cutting through the battlefield. "Protect the princess!" Blue light burst from the girl's hands, spreading across Daniel's wound like living fire. He gasped as the venom's claws loosened for the first time. His last thought before darkness swallowed him was confusion. Daniel's first sensation was weightlessness. Then came the sting of antiseptic air filling his lungs. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting rubble, fire, and death. Instead, he found himself staring at smooth walls of silver and crystal, panels glowing softly with alien script. He wasn't on Earth, or New Carthage. He was inside something far cleaner, far more advanced, definitely not human tech. A sharp voice broke through the haze. "He's awake!" Daniel turned his head, groaning against the pull in his chest. A tall figure in ornate armor stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, eyes narrowing. His armor gleamed with blue light that pulsed in rhythm with his breathing. Behind him, half a dozen guards shifted restlessly. Their weapons trained downward, but their gazes heavy with suspicion. And then she appeared. The girl he had thrown himself in front of. The one he thought just another civilian. She stepped into the chamber wearing ceremonial armor of silver and white, a cloak trailing like woven starlight. Her face was calm, composed, but her violet eyes carried storms within them. "Human," she said, her voice even, though every syllable seemed weighted with authority. "Do you understand what you did?" Daniel coughed, tasting iron in his throat. "Yeah," he rasped. "Took a spear for someone who couldn't fight back." "That about sums it up," the guards hissed in their own language, offended by his bluntness. One even stepped forward, as though ready to strike him down for insolence, but the girl, no, the princess, lifted her hand. The entire room froze. "You speak as though you were protecting a child," she said softly, her eyes boring into him. "But you threw yourself before the warlord of the Zerkai. Do you know what his venom does?" Daniel shifted against the bed, grimacing at the fire still clawing through his veins. "Yeah, feels like I drank acid." That earned a small laugh from her, though it carried sadness. "Most who take even a scratch from that poison last minutes. You survived hours, and you kept fighting." "Strange," Daniel exhaled sharply. "Humans are too stubborn to die on schedule." Her lips curved slightly, but the amusement didn't last. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the others couldn't hear. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" Daniel blinked at her, shrugged. "A survivor. Someone worth saving. Isn't that enough?" For a moment, the steel melted from her gaze. The smallest flicker of vulnerability crossed her face before the mask returned. She drew herself up. "I am Princess Aelira of the Chiron Dominion, heir to the high crown of 1,000 star systems. My capture, or death, would hand the Zerkai Dominion over the galaxy's balance of power. The moment you stepped between me and that spear, you changed more than one life. You altered the course of this war." Daniel frowned, trying to sit up despite the glowing seal stitched into his chest. "Lady, with all respect, I didn't save you for politics. I saw someone about to die. That's all," the guards muttered again, one spitting the word primitive in their tongue. Daniel ignored them. Aelira, however, studied him as though weighing something greater than his words. She finally spoke again, her voice sharp as a blade. "The Zerkai are not finished. Even now, their fleet burns through your skies. Humanity cannot hold them alone. My Dominion's forces are scattered, but I carry the authority to rally them. The only reason I am alive is because of you. That gives you a choice." She leaned in, her face inches from his, violet eyes blazing. "Stand beside me or watch your world fall." Daniel didn't hesitate. He swung his legs off the bed, nearly collapsing from weakness but catching himself with grit alone. He reached for his rifle propped against the wall, its barrel scorched black. "Princess," he said, giving her the same crooked grin he had on the battlefield. "I already stood between you and one spear. Guess I'll stand between you and the next 10. Just point me at where to shoot." For the first time, her expression broke completely. Aelira's lips trembled before she tightened them into a determined line. She nodded once. "Then you are mine until this war ends." At that moment, the walls shook violently. Sirens blared. The bridge officer's voice thundered through the intercom. "Enemy fleet descending! Zerkai reinforcements incoming!" Aelira turned, her cloak sweeping behind her, already barking orders to her guard. Daniel slung his rifle over his shoulder, ignoring the poison still gnawing at his blood. His body might fail, but his will hadn't. He had saved a princess without knowing it. Now, somehow, he was tied to the fate of the galaxy. And for a soldier like Daniel Rourke, there was only one answer. The stars above Earth were no longer a canvas of wonder. They were fire and wreckage. Entire constellations vanished behind curtains of plasma beams and burning ships. Humanity's fleet, already thin, already scarred from years of desperate war, was being torn apart. Daniel Rourke stood on the bridge of the Chiron cruiser Serapis, still dizzy from the poison in his blood, but steadying himself with one hand on a console. Alien glyphs flickered across displays, translating into fractured English. The scale of what he saw made his stomach twist. The Zerkai hadn't come with a raiding party this time. They'd brought a war armada, wave after wave of battleships and spined carriers vomiting out swarms of claw-shaped fighters. Their flagship alone was larger than a city, a jagged silhouette bristling with enough firepower to level continents. And against them, humanity's fleet, battered destroyers, aging carriers, a handful of dreadnoughts running hot. Brave, yes. Suicidal, absolutely. Status? Princess Elira's voice cut through the noise, calm but edged like steel. She stood tall at the center of the command dais, every line of her body radiating command. Her officers rattled off reports, shield grids failing, carriers breached, Earth's orbital defenses collapsing sector by sector. The humans were fighting with everything they had, but it was like trying to plug a dam with bare hands. Daniel didn't wait for permission. He moved toward a weapons station, shoving aside a startled Chiron officer. "I can run this," he barked, slapping the controls alive. The alien display shifted, half familiar thanks to crude translation overlays. His hands flew across it, adjusting trajectory, targeting, compensating for recoil. The Seraphis's broadside lit up. Plasma batteries screamed fire into the void, carving through a Zerkai gunship that had been closing on a wounded human cruiser. Daniel whooped under his breath as the hostile ship erupted into molten shards. One of the alien officers gawked. "He reads our gunnery like instinct." "Humans don't read," Daniel shot back, teeth bared in a grin. "We improvise." But even with every shot, the tide didn't turn. The Zerkai Titan warships pressed forward. One unleashed its main cannon, a blast of molten energy that cut a human battleship clean in two. The wreckage spun down toward Earth, burning like a second sun. The bridge went silent for a moment, everyone staring. Then came another strike, and another. "We can't outlast them," muttered one of Elira's generals. "If the flagship isn't stopped, Earth will fall within the hour." Daniel leaned over the console, sweat dripping down his neck. "Then we stop the flagship." Simple as that. The room erupted in disbelief. One officer snarled, "That ship is invincible! To even approach it is suicide." Daniel turned, his face grim. "So is waiting here until we're all ash. At least suicide with a plan has a chance?" Elira's violet gaze locked on him. There was no mockery in her eyes now, no amusement, only sharp calculation. "You would strike their heart directly?" "With what?" Daniel tapped the sidearm strapped to his thigh, then gestured out the viewport toward the smoking human fleet. "Give me a shuttle, a handful of Marines, and something that goes boom. Doesn't need to be elegant. Just loud enough to crack their core." The bridge erupted again, officers shouting about madness and recklessness. Daniel ignored them, staring only at Elira. "Your Highness," he said firmly, "you asked me to stand beside you. This is me standing. Let me do what humans do best. Hit the impossible target and hit it hard." For a long moment, she didn't answer. The deck trembled as another salvo from the Zerkai flagship tore through the defense lines. Then, slowly, Elira nodded. "Prepare him a strike shuttle. Arm it with a core disruptor." The officers froze. A core disruptor was a weapon reserved for planetary annihilation, not field missions. To hand one over was to entrust him with enough power to end a civilization. "Princess," one of them began, but she silenced him with a gesture. Her eyes never left Daniel's. "If you fail, your people die. If you succeed, you may not return. You understand this?" Daniel smirked, adjusting the strap on his rifle. "Ma'am, I already got stabbed with a poison spear today. I'm running on borrowed time anyway. Might as well spend it buying Earth another sunrise." The Serapis shook violently as a near miss sent sparks cascading through the bridge. Outside, the human fleet was fracturing, Earth's defenses collapsing. The Zerkai swarmed like wolves closing in on a bleeding prey, and in the heart of that storm, Daniel Rourke, battered human soldier, stood grinning like a man already halfway to the grave. "Get me that shuttle," he said, "and point me at their throat." The shuttle rattled like it was about to split apart. Every plate screamed under enemy fire as it streaked through the wreckage toward the Zerkai flagship. Daniel Rourke was strapped in with 5 human Marines and 2 Karen warriors, the cabin lit only by the red glow of combat lighting. The Marines checked their gear in silence. No speeches. No prayers. Just grim eyes and steady hands. They all knew this was a one-way ride. Daniel grinned anyway, thumbing a fresh mag into his rifle. "Don't look so grim, boys. We're about to go knock on their front door with the biggest firecracker in the galaxy. Smile a little," one Marine snorted. "Sir, you're insane," Daniel winked. "Best compliment I've had all week." The pilot screamed over comms, "Brace!" The shuttle slammed into the flagship's underbelly, tearing through armor plating in a trail of sparks. The crash shook their bones, but the reinforced hull held. The ramp blew open and Daniel was first out, rifle blazing. The Zerkai interior was a nightmare, living metal walls, veins of green light pulsing like arteries, the stench of blood and venom thick in the air. Hostile warriors poured in from every angle, their claws raking the deck, spears dripping with toxin. "Push forward," Daniel roared. The Marines laid down fire, grenades ripping through the tight corridors. The Chiron warriors carved through enemies with blades of humming light. Daniel moved like a man possessed, the venom in his veins burning, but his body refusing to yield. Every burst of his rifle was precise, every strike brutal. They fought upward, level by level, leaving a trail of corpses behind. The deeper they went, the stranger the ship became, walls twitching as though alive, floors shifting underfoot. It was less a vessel and more a beast of war. Finally, they reached the heart. A colossal chamber opened before them, dominated by a weapon that looked less like machinery and more like a spear forged by gods. A crystalline cannon stretched from floor to ceiling, its core pulsing with unstable energy. "The Spear of Heaven," one Chiron warrior whispered, awe and dread in his tone. Daniel slapped the pack on his back, the bomb humming dangerously. "Let's give heaven back its spear, shall we?" He sprinted forward, planting the device against the core, fingers flying over the arming sequence. The timer blinked red, 10 minutes, but then the ground shook. The air thickened with a hiss that made every soldier's skin crawl. The Zerkai warlord stepped into the chamber. Daniel froze, recognizing the towering reptile instantly. It was him. The same monster who had driven a poisoned spear into his back. His armor was scorched but reforged, his blade still wet with venom. His eyes locked onto Daniel with cold hatred. "You!" the warlord snarled, his voice like grinding stone. "The human who bleeds for alien royalty. You will not leave this place." The Marines opened fire. The warlord shrugged off the barrage, his hide sparking but unbroken. He lunged, cleaving one Marine in half with a single swing. Panic erupted. The chamber filled with screams, plasma bursts, and the clash of blades. Daniel dropped his rifle. It was useless at this range. He drew the broken half of the spear shaft he'd kept since New Carthage, the jagged end still slick with venom. "Round 2, he growled. The duel was savage. The warlord swung with crushing strength, each strike shaking Daniel's bones. Daniel ducked, rolled, countered with quick jabs, fighting like a street brawler against a mountain. The venom in his blood made every move agony, but he refused to slow. The Marines tried to help, but the warlord swatted them aside like insects. One by one they fell, buying Daniel seconds he didn't have. Finally, the warlord caught him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "You are nothing," the reptile hissed. "A dying animal pretending to fight." Daniel's vision blurred, his lungs screaming. He clenched his teeth, spat blood into the warlord's face, and rammed the broken spear shaft into his throat. The warlord's eyes bulged. Black venom poured from the wound as he staggered back, choking on his own poison. With a roar, Daniel drove the shaft deeper until the giant collapsed in a heap. He fell to one knee, chest heaving, the world spinning. Around him lay the bodies of friends and foes alike. Only 2 Marines still breathed, dragging themselves upright. The bomb timer blinked down. 1 minute. Daniel forced a grin. "Well, boys, looks like we're not making it home." One Marine shook his head weakly. "Sir, you bought us the win." "That's enough." The chamber pulsed violently as the Spear of Heaven began to overload. Daniel straightened, raising his rifle one last time in salute toward Earth far below. "Tell your gods," he muttered, "humanity doesn't kneel." And then the world went white. The detonation split the void like a second sun. The Zerkai flagship cracked open from the inside, a spear of white fire ripping through its spine. Shockwaves tore through their formation, shredding smaller escorts in a chain of violent blossoms. On the Seraphis's bridge, silence reigned for a single heartbeat, then erupted into cheers. Karen officers slammed fists against their chests in salute. Human crew roared with disbelief and triumph. For the first time in the war, the Zerkai armada was reeling, but Elira did not cheer. She stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides, her violet eyes locked on the expanding wreckage of the enemy flagship. Somewhere in that storm of fire and shattered hull plating was him, the reckless soldier who had charged into the impossible and torn out the enemy's heart. Daniel Rourke. Her guards moved quickly, their voices urgent. "Your Highness, we must withdraw. The enemy still has numbers. Victory is not yet secure." Another spoke sharply. "The human is gone. His sacrifice must be honored, not squandered. If you risk yourself now, silence." Her voice cracked like a blade unsheathed. Every officer stopped. Elira rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. But now her command carried a fury none dared resist. She stepped toward the viewport, her cloak dragging like smoke behind her. "That man bled for me before he knew my name. He faced death twice in one day without hesitation. And you think I will leave him to drift like debris?" The guards exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "He is only human." Elira turned, eyes blazing. "He is the reason I still draw breath." Without another word, she strode from the bridge. Minutes later, she was inside a dropship, sealing the hatch herself. Her guards begged her to reconsider, to let others fly into the wreck. Elira ignored them. She strapped into the pilot's chair, her slender hands moving with precision over alien controls. The Seraphis shrank behind her as the dropship dove into the debris field. The wreckage of the Zerkai flagship was a graveyard of steel and bone, its twisted hull groaning as gravity pulled chunks into Earth's atmosphere. Plasma fires still raged, scattering shards of molten alloy across the void. "Come on, Daniel," she whispered, scanning. Her fingers danced over the sensors, tuning them past interference, filtering through thousands of signals. Finally, there. A weak distress beacon, faint but steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. She locked onto it and pushed the dropship harder. The field fought her every second. Chunks of plating spun like guillotines. Engines exploded in sudden bursts of fire. Twice she had to wrench the controls to avoid being impaled. Sweat clung to her brow, but her focus never wavered. At last, she saw him. A lone figure drifting among the wreckage, armor cracked, rifle still clutched to his chest, as though he'd died standing guard. His body was limp, spinning slowly in the dark, her throat tightened. For a breathless moment, she feared she was too late. She brought the ship alongside, extended the grapplers, and pulled him into the airlock. Inside, the silence broke. The sound of his ragged breathing filled the cabin. Weak, shallow, but alive. Elira knelt beside him immediately, hands pressed against his wounds. Her healing light flared, flooding over his battered body. The glow stitched torn flesh, burned away venom, forced his heart to steady. She poured every ounce of energy she had into him until her vision blurred, until her hands shook from exhaustion. "Why?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes as she pressed her forehead against his. "Why throw yourself before death for someone you did not know?" His eyes fluttered half open. His lips cracked into that crooked grin she had come to know. His voice was little more than a rasp, but it carried weight. "Princess, soldier, doesn't matter. You were someone worth saving." Her chest ached, the words striking deeper than any weapon could. For all her life, people had knelt before her crown, bowed to her name, sought her power. No one had ever seen her as simply a person, until him. Her guards burst into the cabin, weapons ready, but froze at the sight. Royalty cradling a half-dead human in her arms. Some wanted to speak. None dared. Elira lifted her gaze, eyes wet but unyielding. "He lives," she said, her voice like iron. "And as long as I breathe, no one will call him only human again." The Seraphis hailed her return with thunderous cheers, but Elira ignored them. She carried Daniel herself to the medbay, refusing help, her steps steady despite her trembling muscles. News of the flagship's destruction spread like wildfire. Human ships rallied. The Zerkai scattered. For the first time in years, Earth was not burning, it was breathing. But for Elira, the victory was not in the wreckage of enemies or the survival of fleets. It was in the faint, stubborn heartbeat of the man who had saved her twice. In that moment, she swore silently. Whatever storms still waited in the galaxy, Daniel Rourke would not face them alone. The battle was not finished when Elira dragged Daniel back from death. The Zerkai still swarmed across the system, their ships blackening the stars like a tide of locusts. But something had changed. The moment their flagship had been destroyed, their discipline fractured. Squadrons broke formation, commanders argued across channels, and the once unstoppable swarm began to scatter. Humanity saw it first. From Earth's battered defense stations, from lunar gun batteries, from scarred destroyers still limping through the void, every soldier smelled weakness. "Push them back," the human admiral roared over comms. "Make them choke on their own fear." For the first time, the Zerkai were not the hunters. They were prey. On the Seraphis, Elira stood tall once more, though exhaustion shadowed her eyes. Behind her, Daniel floated in a med stasis cradle, machines weaving what her light could not. His breath was stronger now, his heart steady, his body refusing to yield. Her council gathered around her, arguing in sharp tones. "Your Highness, we must retreat to secure Chiron space. The humans are reckless allies. They will burn with or without us." "Let them," another muttered. "Our fleets are needed for our own war front." Elira's gaze cut through them. She raised a hand, silencing the chamber. Her voice was steady, regal, but beneath it pulsed a flame that had not been there before. "Look beyond your pride. Humanity stands on the edge of annihilation, yet they fight harder than we ever imagined. One human destroyed what centuries of our campaigns could not. If we abandon them now, we are no better than the Zerkai who prey upon the weak." Her words carried weight. For a long breath, no one dared respond. Then slowly, her generals bowed. The decision was made. The Seraphis broadcast a single signal across human channels. Chiron forces stand with Earth. The final hours of the battle became legend. Chiron warships and human frigates formed joint lines, firing in perfect rhythm. Fighters screamed between their hulls, weaving nets of fire that trapped Zerkai cruisers and tore them apart. Earth's skies lit with burning wreckage as the swarm faltered, collapsed, and finally broke. The Zerkai retreated. For the first time in living memory, they fled. Humanity watched in awe as the tide rolled back into the black, leaving behind only silence and the debris of war. Cheers echoed across Earth's surface, from underground bunkers to broken skyscrapers. Soldiers wept openly in their cockpits. Families embraced in ruined cities. Humanity had survived, and it all began with one man throwing himself before a poisoned spear. When the war councils met days later, the chamber was filled with noise, debates, treaties, accusations, promises. Human leaders argued fiercely. Chiron envoys spoke with cautious respect. Yet amid the chaos, everyone's eyes drifted to the stasis chamber where Daniel lay recovering. He was no admiral, no king, no commander, but his name was already carried like fire through every fleet. To humans, he was proof that courage could defy extinction. To the Chiron, he was the warrior who had earned their princess's loyalty with nothing but instinct and heart. When he finally stirred awake, the chamber fell silent. The man who had been called reckless, foolish, expendable, sat up and looked around with that same crooked grin. "Well," Daniel rasped, "did we win?" Laughter broke the tension like thunder. For a moment, humanity and Chiron forgot politics, forgot suspicion. They remembered they were alive. Later, Elira stood beside him on a balcony of the Seraphis, Earth's blue curve glimmering below. The war was far from over. The Zerkai were wounded, not dead. But the galaxy itself felt different, as though something impossible had shifted. "You changed everything," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. His body was scarred, his movement slow, but his voice was steady. "No, I just did what anyone should do." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Do you still not understand? You were not saving a soldier. You shielded a crown, the heir of an empire. Your act has bound two worlds together." He met her gaze without flinching. "Doesn't matter to me if you're a princess or a soldier." "I'd do it again!" Her throat tightened. No oath of loyalty, no treaty signed in ink could have been stronger than those words. News spread quickly. The alliance of Earth and Chiron was forged, not through politics, but through sacrifice. Fleets would train together, scientists would share knowledge, soldiers would bleed side by side. Humanity was no longer a fractured species clinging to survival. They had allies, purpose, and a voice in the galaxy. And at the heart of it all was the story that would never be forgotten. The man who leapt before the poisoned spear. The princess who chose to stand beside him. Together, they had proven something the galaxy had long denied. Humanity was here to stay.